The morning Jake told me no one would ever love me like he did, I was standing in our kitchen at 6:47 a.m., eating cereal straight from the box because I'd overslept again and missed breakfast. The Honey Nut Cheerios tasted like cardboard in my mouth, but I kept chewing mechanically while Jake brushed his teeth at the kitchen sink. We'd run out of bowls, or rather, I'd been too exhausted to do dishes for 3 days running, and the clean ones sat in the dishwasher like an accusation I wasn't ready to face. "Seriously, Lena," Jake said, spitting toothpaste foam into the sink, his voice carrying that particular tone of patient exasperation I'd grown to recognize as his version of morning affection. "Look at yourself." I looked down at my reflection in the toaster's chrome surface, unwashed hair scraped into a messy bun, yesterday's mascara smudged under my eyes, wearing the same oversized sweater I'd slept in. "You think anyone else is going to put up with your panic attacks? Your weird food hoarding, the way you cry during commercials?" He rinsed his mouth, then turned to face me with the expression of someone delivering uncomfortable but necessary medicine. "I'm the best you're ever going to get, and we both know it." The context was last night's disaster at his company party. I'd hidden in the bathroom for 27 minutes. I knew because I'd counted each second on my phone while sitting on the toilet seat lid, trying not to hyperventilate. Jake's boss's wife, Patricia, had cornered me near the appetizer table with her perfectly veneered smile and her questions that felt like tiny knives. "So, when are you two going to make it official?" she'd asked, gesturing toward my left hand with its conspicuously naked ring finger. "Jake's such a catch. You're so lucky to have him." Lucky. The word had lodged in my throat like a stone. "We're taking things slow," I'd managed, but Patricia wasn't finished. "Oh, honey, at your age? Better lock him down before someone else does. Men like Jake don't stay single long." That's when the walls started closing in. The party noise became overwhelming. Laughter too loud, conversations too close, the smell of wine and cologne suffocating. I'd mumbled an excuse about the bathroom and fled, leaving Jake to make apologies for my social anxiety issues. "I wasn't being cruel," Jake continued now, wiping his mouth with a paper towel. "I'm just being realistic. You had another episode last night." "People noticed, Lena." My boss asked if you were okay. Episode. Like my panic attack was a television show instead of my nervous system short-circuiting under pressure I couldn't name. "I know," I whispered, hating how small my voice sounded. "I'm sorry." "You don't need to apologize. I'm just saying—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I love you exactly as you are. Your quirks, your problems, all of it. Most guys wouldn't be so understanding." Understanding. The word he used like a gift he was giving. Me, like tolerance, was the same thing as love. I nodded and took another handful of cereal, letting the sugar crunch between my teeth while Jake gathered his work things. This was his version of reassurance, reminding me how difficult I was to love, how lucky I was that he'd chosen to love me anyway. But something about the casual certainty in his voice that morning cracked something inside me. Not anger. I was too tired for anger. Not hurt. I'd been hurt so many times the emotion had worn thin, like fabric washed too often. It was more like the moment when you finally understand a math problem that's been confusing you for weeks. Sudden, clear, and impossible to unsee. I looked at Jake gathering his laptop bag, checking his reflection in the hallway mirror, and realized he needed me to believe I was unlovable. Not because it was true, but because it made him feel secure. If I thought I was lucky to have him, I'd never leave. If I thought no one else would want me, I'd never test that theory. His love wasn't unconditional. It was conditional on my continued belief in my own inadequacy. The evidence was everywhere once I started looking for it. 3 years of subtle corrections. "Are you sure you want to wear that? Maybe you should think about whether that's the best choice." "I'm just trying to help you be your best self." My best self, according to Jake, was smaller, quieter, more grateful. "You're probably right," I said, my voice steady for the first time in months. The relief on his face was immediate and telling. His shoulders relaxed, his smile became genuine instead of patient. He kissed my forehead like I was a child who'd finally learned her lesson. "I love you, babe," he said. "I just want you to be happy." What he didn't realize was that I'd finally heard what he was really saying. No one will ever love me like he does. Possessively, conditionally, with constant reminders of my flaws. And for the first time in 3 years, that sounded like a promise rather than a threat. After he left for work, I sat in our kitchen surrounded by the debris of my diminished life: dirty dishes in the sink, empty takeout containers on the counter, a refrigerator full of food I'd bought but been too anxious to cook. The apartment felt like a museum of my failures, each mess a testament to my inability to function like a normal adult. I opened my phone and scrolled to Dr. Martinez's number. I'd been seeing her for 6 months, ever since the panic attacks started happening at work. Jake had suggested therapy after I'd locked myself in the supply closet during a staff meeting, hyperventilating because my boss had asked me to present quarterly numbers, and I'd been convinced I'd somehow miscalculated everything. "Lena, we've talked about emotional regulation through food," Dr. Martinez had said during our last session, her voice gentle but persistent. "Can you tell me what you ate yesterday?" The question had made me want to lie, but she had a way of looking at me that made dishonesty feel pointless. "Granola bars for breakfast, a salad for lunch." I'd paused, knowing she was waiting. "And cookies. A lot of cookies, after Jake went to bed." "How many cookies?" "The whole sleeve. Maybe 2 sleeves." She'd written something in her notepad, and I'd felt the familiar shame wash over me. "Lena, you're not pathetic for having coping mechanisms, but we need to understand why you're hiding your eating from Jake." Because he already thought I was too much. Because he'd made comments about my weight gain. Because eating was the only thing I did that was entirely mine, even if it was destroying me. "I don't know," I'd lied. Now, sitting in the kitchen with Jake's words echoing in my head, I finally knew. I'd been eating my feelings because I wasn't allowed to express them. I'd been hiding food because I was hiding myself, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but the version of me Jake could tolerate. I was 28 years old and hiding Oreos like contraband, lying about what I'd eaten for lunch, wearing increasingly baggy clothes to hide a body I'd grown to hate. But this morning felt different. This morning, I'd heard the truth underneath his careful concern. He needed me broken to feel whole. He needed me grateful to feel generous. He needed me small to feel significant. And for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't willing to shrink anymore. I picked up my phone and dialed Dr. Martinez's office, my fingers surprisingly steady as I scheduled an emergency appointment for that afternoon. There were things I needed to say, truths I needed to speak out loud, patterns I needed to break. Starting with the biggest one: believing that Jake's version of love was the best I deserved. The woman who had spent 3 years apologizing for taking up space was finally ready to claim some. The transformation began with spite, but it was sustained by something deeper: a growing curiosity about who I might be without Jake's constant editorial input. 2 weeks after the kitchen revelation, I was standing in the break room at work, actually taking a lunch break for the first time in months. My coworkers looked surprised to see me away from my desk at noon, but I'd started doing small things differently, testing what it felt like to exist without constant productivity as proof of my worth. "Lena, right," said Marcus from accounting, a guy I'd nodded to in hallways but never actually talked to. "I never see you in here. You always eat at your desk." The observation stung because it was true. I'd been eating sad desk salads for 3 years, multitasking through lunch because Jake had convinced me I was always behind, always struggling to keep up with basic adult responsibilities. "I'm trying something new," I said, unwrapping the turkey sandwich I'd actually made that morning instead of buying from the vending machine. It was a small rebellion, but it felt enormous. The gym membership came during my lunch. Break the following week. I walked into Planet Fitness near my office with no plan beyond doing something Jake would hate, something that existed entirely outside his sphere of influence and opinion. "First time joining a gym?" asked the perky sales associate, her name tag reading Jessica in purple letters. "Yes," I admitted, feeling like I was confessing to a crime. "That's so exciting! What are your fitness goals?" I almost said weight loss because that's what women were supposed to say, but something stopped me. I want to know what my body can do, I said instead, surprising myself with the honesty. Jessica's smile became genuine. That's the best reason I've ever heard. The first month was humiliating in ways Instagram transformation posts never mention. I couldn't run for 5 minutes without wheezing, my face turning an alarming shade of red while college students jogged effortlessly on adjacent treadmills. I used the lightest weights available and still felt my arms shaking, convinced everyone was staring at the fat girl who clearly didn't belong. "You're new," said a woman in her 50s, appearing beside me while I struggled with a 10-pound dumbbell. "I'm Carol. I started here 6 months ago." "Lena," I panted, grateful for any human interaction that wasn't pity-based. "First month is hell," Carol said matter-of-factly. I cried in my car after every workout, but I kept coming back out of pure stubbornness. Stubbornness. I could work with that. I wore the same 3 oversized t-shirts to every workout because I didn't own proper gym clothes and was too self-conscious to shop for any. But I kept going. Not because I was disciplined or motivated, but because quitting would prove Jake right about my inability to follow through on anything challenging. 3 weeks in, something shifted. I could run for 8 minutes straight. I could lift 15-pound weights without my arms giving out. I could walk up the subway stairs without getting winded. Small victories that felt enormous because no one else was measuring them, judging them, or finding them insufficient. "You're getting stronger," Carol observed one evening as we stretched after our workouts. Stronger. Not smaller, not better, not fixed. Stronger. At home, Jake was starting to notice changes he couldn't quite articulate. I was taking longer in the bathroom, not because I was doing anything elaborate, but because I was looking at myself in the mirror without immediately cataloging flaws. I was eating dinner at the table instead of in front of the TV, actually tasting food instead of using it to numb anxiety. "You seem different lately," he said one evening, his tone carefully neutral. "Different how?" "I don't know. More energetic, I guess." "Are you feeling okay?" The question revealed everything wrong with our dynamic. In Jake's world, my feeling good was cause for concern rather than celebration. "I'm feeling better than I have in a while," I said honestly. His expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "That's great, babe. Just don't overdo it with the gym thing. You know how you get obsessive about new projects." Obsessive. Another word in his arsenal of gentle corrections, designed to make me second-guess any sustained effort toward self-improvement. "I'm just trying to be healthier," I said. "I know, and that's awesome. I just don't want you to burn out or get disappointed if you don't see results fast enough." He was already preparing me to fail, setting up the narrative that would explain my inevitable return to the version of myself he preferred, but something had changed in how I heard his concern. Where I used to hear care, I now heard control. Where I used to hear wisdom, I now heard fear. Fear that I might discover I was capable of more than he'd convinced me I was. 6 months in, I'd lost 18 pounds and gained something more valuable, a sense of my own physical capability. My clothes fit differently, but more importantly, I moved differently. I took up space differently. I existed in my body instead of apologizing for it. The real change, though, was happening at work. My boss, Margaret, had been promoted to regional manager, and I was covering most of her old responsibilities without the title or pay increase. For months, I'd been creating campaigns, managing client relationships, and developing strategies while she got credit for the results. "Lena, can you handle the Morrison account presentation next week?" Margaret asked during one of our increasingly brief check-ins. "I have a meeting with corporate that day." It was the 4th presentation she'd asked me to cover that month. "Of course," I said automatically, then heard myself add, "but I think we should discuss me getting official recognition for the work I'm doing." Margaret looked surprised. "Of course, we'll definitely talk about that. After things settle down with my new role." After things settled down. The perpetual promise of future recognition that never seemed to arrive. That evening, I mentioned the conversation to Jake while we made dinner together. "You're doing great work," he said, chopping vegetables with mechanical precision. "But maybe don't push too hard for recognition right now. You know how corporate environments can be about people who seem too eager." Too eager. Another gentle redirection away from ambition. Another subtle reminder that wanting more was dangerous, unrealistic, presumptuous. "I've been doing Margaret's job for 4 months," I said. "I think asking for acknowledgement is reasonable." "I'm not saying it's not reasonable. I'm just saying timing matters. You don't want to seem entitled." Entitled. The word that had been used to shame women out of asking for what they'd earned since the beginning of time. But this time, instead of absorbing his caution as wisdom, I felt a flicker of something I'd almost forgotten: anger. Clean, clarifying anger that burned away the fog of self-doubt I'd been living in. The woman who had spent 3 years apologizing for existing was finally getting angry about being told to wait for permission to claim what was already hers. "Maybe entitled isn't the worst thing to be," I said quietly. Jake looked up from his vegetables, confusion flickering across his face. "What do you mean?" "Maybe I am entitled to recognition for my work. Maybe I am entitled to take up space. Maybe I'm entitled to believe I deserve better than what I've been accepting." The words hung in the kitchen air like a declaration of war. Jake's expression went through several stages: surprise, concern, and finally that careful patience he used when he thought I was being irrational. "Of course you deserve good things, babe. I just don't want you to get hurt by having unrealistic expectations." Unrealistic expectations. Like expecting to be credited for my work. Like expecting to be supported by my partner. Like expecting to grow without being told I was growing in the wrong direction. "I think my expectations have been too low," I said. "Not too high." And for the first time in 3 years, I meant it. The senior marketing position posting appeared on our company intranet on a Tuesday morning, and I stared at it for 47 minutes before closing my laptop in defeat. The job description read like a wish list of everything I'd been doing unofficially for months: strategic campaign development, client relationship management, cross-departmental collaboration, budget oversight for accounts worth millions. I had the experience, the track record, the client testimonials. But Jake's voice echoed in my head like a broken record. "You know how overwhelmed you get. You're not ready for that kind of pressure." I almost didn't apply. That evening, I mentioned the position to Jake while we ate takeout Chinese food in front of Netflix, the same Tuesday night routine we'd fallen into without ever discussing it. "Senior marketing, huh?" He poked at his lo mein with plastic chopsticks. "That's a big jump from where you are now." "I've been doing most of the work already," I said, testing the waters. "Yeah, but that's with Margaret overseeing everything. Being officially responsible is different. The stress level, the expectations." He trailed off, letting the implications hang in the air. The stress level. As if I wasn't already managing the stress without the recognition or compensation. "I think I can handle it," I said quietly. Jake's smile was gentle, patronizing. "Of course you can, babe. I just worry about you taking on too much. You know how you get when you're overwhelmed." How I get. Like my anxiety was a character flaw rather than a response to being constantly undermined and second-guessed. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while Jake slept peacefully beside me. In the darkness, I could finally admit the truth I'd been avoiding. I was terrified of applying because I was terrified of succeeding. Success would mean Jake was wrong about my limitations. Success would mean I'd been capable all along, and I'd just been convinced otherwise. Success would mean I didn't need him to manage my expectations because I was capable of exceeding them myself. I submitted my application at 3:47 a.m. from my phone, my finger hovering over the submit button for 10 minutes before I finally pressed it. The interview process was brutal and exhilarating in equal measure. 6 weeks of presentations, case studies, and meetings with executives I'd only seen in company newsletters. I prepared obsessively, staying late at the office to research competitors, analyze market trends, develop proposals that kept me awake with anxiety and excitement. "Tell us about a time you had to manage a difficult client relationship," asked Jennifer Walsh, our VP of Sales, during the second-round interview. I thought of the Morrison account, 6 months of their marketing director changing requirements weekly, demanding impossible timelines, threatening to pull their contract every time we pushed back on unrealistic expectations. "Last year, Morrison Tech was considering ending their contract with us," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. Their marketing director felt our campaigns weren't generating enough qualified leads, but when I analyzed their conversion data, I realized the issue wasn't lead quality, it was their sales process. Jennifer leaned forward, interested. How did you handle that? I scheduled a meeting with their entire sales team and our account managers. Instead of defending our work, I presented a joint strategy that aligned our lead generation with their sales cycles. We implemented new tracking systems and communication protocols. Within 3 months, their conversion rate increased by 34%, and they renewed their contract for 2 years. The story was true, but I'd never gotten credit for it. Margaret had presented it as a department success without mentioning my role. Impressive, said David Chen from corporate, making notes. What would you say was the key to turning that relationship around? Listening without getting defensive, I said, surprising myself with the honesty. Sometimes the client's frustration isn't really about you. It's about their own challenges. If you can help solve their actual problem instead of just defending your work, everyone wins. The words felt powerful coming out of my mouth, like I was finally speaking in my own voice instead of echoing what I thought they wanted to hear. 3 weeks later, Jennifer called me into her office with an expression I couldn't read. Lena, I'll cut to the chase. The position is yours if you want it. 32% salary increase, full benefits package, and you'll be reporting directly to Diana Chen, our new regional VP. My hands started shaking before my brain processed the words. Yes, I want it. Jennifer smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in 5 years of working at the company. Good. Diana specifically requested you for her team. She was impressed by your Morrison presentation. Someone had specifically requested me. Someone had been impressed by my work. That evening, Jake's reaction was complicated in ways I was only beginning to understand. Pride mixed with something that looked like panic, congratulations tainted with concern. Senior Marketing Director, he said, reading the official offer letter I'd printed out. Wow, that's a big deal, Lena. It is a big deal, I agreed, waiting for him to celebrate with me. I just hope it's not too much pressure. You know how you get when what, Jake? I interrupted, something sharp creeping into my voice. When I'm successful? When I'm recognized for my capabilities? He looked startled by my tone. That's not what I meant. I just worry about the stress affecting your anxiety. My anxiety. Always my anxiety, never his need to keep me small. Maybe my anxiety will get better when I'm finally being challenged instead of undervalued, I said. The words created a silence that felt like the space between lightning and thunder. My first day in the new role, I met Diana Chen, a woman in her 40s with silver-streaked hair and the kind of confidence that came from competence rather than performance. Her office was filled with awards from campaigns I'd read about in marketing journals, strategies that had revolutionized how brands connected with audiences. Lena, she said, standing to shake my hand, I've been following your work for months. The Morrison turnaround was brilliant. Following my work. Someone had been paying attention to what I was actually doing, not just what my job title suggested I should be doing. Thank you. I'm excited to learn from you. Diana's smile was warm but direct. I'm not here to teach you, Lena. I'm here to support you. There's a difference. Support, not manage. Collaborate, not oversee. Under Diana's guidance, I launched a social media campaign for our biggest tech client that exceeded projected engagement by 180%. Instead of taking credit or minimizing my role, Diana sent an email to the entire executive team highlighting my strategic thinking and execution. This is what leadership looks like, she told me over coffee after the campaign results came in. Recognizing good work and making sure the right people get credit for it. I'd never had a boss who treated my success as evidence of her good judgment rather than a threat to her position. The business travel started 3 months into my new role, a conference in Denver where I presented our latest campaign strategies to a room full of industry veterans, client meetings in Portland where my recommendations could determine million-dollar budgets, strategy sessions in San Francisco where I collaborated with marketing directors from Fortune 500 companies, cities where I was Lena, the marketing director, rather than Jake's anxious girlfriend. In Denver, I gave a presentation on customer retention strategies that earned a standing ovation. In Portland, I closed a deal that had been stalled for 6 months by understanding what the client actually needed instead of what they said they wanted. In San Francisco, I was invited to speak on a panel about innovative marketing approaches. For the first time in my adult life, I was being recognized for my mind, my capabilities, my strategic thinking. Jake's texts during these trips revealed his growing unease. "How's the conference?" "Don't let them overwhelm you with too much networking. Remember to eat regular meals. You know how you get when your blood sugar drops." "Missing you. Can't wait for you to be home where I can take care of you." Each message was a subtle reminder that he saw me as fragile, unpredictable, in need of management. But in Denver, Portland, and San Francisco, I was none of those things. I was confident, articulate, someone whose opinions mattered. I was someone who could handle complex negotiations, high-pressure presentations, and strategic decision-making without falling apart. I was someone who didn't need Jake to translate the world for me because I was perfectly capable of navigating it myself. The realization hit me during my flight back from San Francisco, somewhere over Nevada at 35,000 feet. I was reviewing notes from the conference, strategies I wanted to implement, connections I'd made with industry leaders who wanted to collaborate on future projects. I was happy, genuinely, uncomplicatedly happy. And for the first time in 3 years, that happiness had nothing to do with Jake's approval, his mood, or his opinion of my choices. I was succeeding not despite his doubts, but in the complete absence of his influence. The woman he'd convinced was too anxious for real responsibility was closing million-dollar deals. The woman he'd told was overwhelmed by basic adult tasks was managing complex projects across multiple time zones. The woman he'd said no one else would love was being courted by competitors who wanted to hire her away. I was becoming someone he'd never expected me to be, someone he'd actively discouraged me from becoming. And as the plane descended toward Seattle, I realized that growth and Jake's love were becoming mutually exclusive territories. The beginning of the end came disguised as the biggest professional victory of my life. I'd been working on the Nexus Industries deal for 4 months. A multi-year contract worth over $2 million that would establish our firm as the premier marketing agency for emerging tech companies on the West Coast. The client was notoriously difficult, known for burning through agencies like Kindling, demanding impossible timelines and perfect execution with budgets that never quite matched their expectations. But I understood them in a way their previous agencies hadn't. Where others saw impossible clients, I saw a company struggling to communicate their value proposition to investors who didn't understand their technology. Where others saw unreasonable demands, I saw founders desperate to prove their startup could compete with established players. The final presentation was on a Thursday afternoon in their glass-walled conference room overlooking Elliott Bay. I'd prepared for 6 weeks, developing a comprehensive strategy that addressed not just their immediate marketing needs, but their long-term brand positioning as they scaled toward IPO. "This is exactly what we've been looking for," said Michael Chen, their CEO, after I finished presenting. "Someone who gets what we're trying to build, not just what we're trying to sell." The contract was signed that afternoon. Diana called me into her office an hour later, her smile wider than I'd ever seen it. "Lena, do you understand what you just accomplished? Nexus has been considered impossible to work with. You didn't just land a client, you cracked a code." Cracked a code? The phrase made me feel like I'd discovered something about myself I'd never known existed. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop," I admitted. "There is no other shoe," Diana said firmly. "This is what competence looks like. This is what happens when someone recognizes your capabilities and gets out of your way. Gets out of your way." The opposite of everything Jake had done for 3 years. I drove home that evening with music playing loud, windows down despite the October chill, feeling the kind of professional satisfaction I'd only read about in career advice articles. I'd earned something significant through my own capabilities, my own understanding, my own strategic thinking. I couldn't wait to share it with the person who was supposed to love me most. Jake was on the couch playing video games when I walked through the door, controller in his hands, headset around his neck, the same position I'd found him in hundreds of evenings before. "Jake, I said, my voice bright with excitement. I have amazing news. He paused his game, a small courtesy that felt generous in the moment, and turned to face me. I closed the Nexus deal. 2.3 million over 3 years. Diana says it's the biggest contract our department has ever landed. I waited for celebration, for pride, for some acknowledgement that his girlfriend had just accomplished something remarkable. Jake's smile was tight, controlled. That's great, babe. Really great. He nodded slowly, processing. I barely recognize you anymore. The comment was meant to sound wistful, maybe even romantic, but I heard the accusation underneath. What do you mean? I mean, you're so different now, confident in this way that's. He searched for words. It's like you're becoming someone else entirely. Someone else entirely. Someone who believed she was capable of more than managing his moods and absorbing his doubts. Good, I said, pouring myself a glass of wine with hands that didn't shake. I like this version better. Jake's expression shifted, something uncomfortable flickering across his features. Sometimes I wonder if all this success is changing you in ways that aren't necessarily positive. There it was, the suggestion that my growth was somehow a loss, that success was corrupting me rather than revealing who I'd always been capable of being. How is professional success not positive? It's not about the success itself. It's about how it's affecting you. You're so focused on work, on proving yourself, that you're losing touch with what really matters. What really matters. His comfort, his sense of importance, his need to feel necessary. What really matters to me is finally being recognized for my capabilities instead of being told to lower my expectations. Jake's face went through several expressions: confusion, hurt, and finally something that looked like panic. Is that what you think I've been doing? Telling you to lower your expectations? The question hung between us like a challenge. Jake, when I wanted to apply for this position, you warned me about being overwhelmed. When I started working out, you worried I was becoming obsessive. When I began traveling for work, you reminded me how I get when I'm away from home. Every single time I've tried to grow, you've found reasons why it might be dangerous. I was looking out for you, he said, his voice rising slightly. I was trying to protect you from disappointment. You were protecting yourself from the possibility that I might not need protecting. The words came out sharper than I'd intended, but they felt true in a way that made my chest tight. The fight that should have followed never materialized. Instead, Jake went quiet, the way he always did when I said something that threatened the narrative he'd constructed about our relationship. 3 weeks later, the black dress incident would end everything. Our company's annual gala was approaching, a black tie fundraiser where we celebrated the year's biggest successes and networked with potential clients. I'd bought a dress for the occasion, the first formal wear I'd purchased in years that was designed to flatter rather than hide my body. The dress was black silk with clean lines and a fitted silhouette that showed I had a shape worth showing. Not revealing, not inappropriate, just confident. It was the kind of dress worn by women who believed they deserved to take up space. What do you think? I asked, modeling it for Jake in our bedroom. His first reaction was physical, a slight recoil as if my confidence was something that might be contagious. Don't you think that's a little much for a work event? A little much. The phrase that had been used to shame women out of visibility since the beginning of time. What do you mean? I mean, it's very attention-getting. You're going to be representing the company, right? Maybe something more conservative would be better. Conservative, smaller, less noticeable, more apologetic for existing. No, I said simply. I think it's exactly right. Jake's expression tightened. I'm not trying to control what you wear, Lena. I'm just thinking about how it might be perceived. By who? By your colleagues, by clients, by people who might get the wrong impression about what kind of professional you are. What kind of professional I was? As if confidence was unprofessional, as if looking attractive meant I wasn't serious about my work. The kind of professional who just landed the biggest deal in our department's history? That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean, Jake? The question created a silence that felt like the moment before an avalanche. I meant that you're changing in ways that make me worry about us, about who you're becoming when you're not with me, who I was becoming when I wasn't with him. Someone confident, someone capable, someone who didn't need his permission to take up space. And who am I when I'm with you? He looked genuinely confused by the question, as if he'd never considered that there might be a difference. You're my girlfriend. You're the woman I fell in love with. The woman he'd fallen in love with was anxious, insecure, grateful for his attention, and convinced she was difficult to love. What if the woman you fell in love with was just the woman I became when I believed I wasn't worth loving? The question hung in our bedroom like smoke from a fire neither of us had meant to start. I don't understand what you're asking me. I'm asking if you can love who I'm becoming, or if you only loved who I was when I thought I wasn't enough. Jake sat on the edge of our bed, his hands clasped together, looking like someone trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. You're my girlfriend, Lena. Of course I love you. But lately, it feels like you're turning into someone I don't recognize. Someone who thinks our relationship is holding you back. Our relationship. Not him, our relationship. As if the dynamic that had nearly destroyed my sense of self was something we'd created together instead of something he'd imposed, and I'd eventually escaped. If you can't love who I'm becoming, I said quietly, then you never really loved who I was. The words came out with surprising gentleness, like a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis with compassion but certainty. Jake's face went through a series of emotions: denial, hurt, anger, and finally something that might have been recognition. So, that's it? 3 years together, and you're just going to throw it away because I'm concerned about how much you're changing. I'm choosing growth over stagnation. I'm choosing self-respect over security. I'm choosing to become someone I actually like instead of staying someone you can manage. The breakup, when it finally happened, felt less like an ending and more like a surgical removal of something that had been growing in the wrong place. I moved out that weekend, packing only what was indisputably mine and leaving behind 3 years of trying to be someone small enough for his affection. My new studio apartment was in Capitol Hill, the neighborhood I'd always wanted to live in, but Jake had deemed too expensive and impractical. It was small, but it was mine, filled with light and the intoxicating silence of not having to manage anyone else's emotions. The aftermath was messier than I'd expected. Some days I felt powerful and clear-headed, finally free from the constant mental gymnastics of anticipating Jake's reactions to my choices. Other days I missed him intensely, not the real Jake, but the version I'd constructed in my head, the one who would eventually celebrate my growth instead of fearing it. I grieved not just the relationship, but the energy I'd invested in trying to make someone love me who had needed me to be less than I was, to feel secure in himself. Late at night in my new apartment, I'd catch myself reaching for my phone to text him about small victories, a client compliment, a successful presentation, a moment of professional satisfaction. Then I'd remember that sharing good news with Jake had always required managing his reaction to it, cushioning my success so it didn't threaten his comfort. For the first time in 3 years, my happiness didn't need his approval to exist. The woman Jake had said no one would ever love was learning to love herself, not as a consolation prize, but as the most important relationship she'd ever build. 2 years after leaving Jake, I posted a photo from the Denver airport at 6 a.m., coffee in hand, boarding pass to New York visible in the corner of the frame. The caption was simple: another day, another client presentation. Still can't believe this is my life. 3 years ago, my Instagram had been dormant, a graveyard of couple photos and forced smiles that Jake had criticized until I'd stopped posting altogether. Now, it was a celebration of a life I was genuinely excited to document. The comments came flooding in from colleagues, clients, friends I'd reconnected with since reclaiming my social media presence. "Get it, girl!" From Carol, my gym buddy who'd watched me transform from someone who cried in her car after workouts to someone who deadlifted her body weight. "Proud of you, Lena." From Diana, who'd just announced my promotion to regional director at our company's quarterly meeting. Regional director. 6 months ago, the title would have felt impossible. Now, it felt inevitable. The flight to New York was first class, a perk that came with my new position overseeing marketing campaigns across the entire Pacific Northwest. I worked on my presentation while sipping champagne at 35,000 feet, reviewing strategies for a startup that had specifically requested me after hearing about the Nexus industry's success. This was what competence felt like when it wasn't being questioned, diminished, or managed by someone else's insecurities. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, a mutual friend who'd stayed connected to both Jake and me after the breakup. Can we grab coffee this week? I have some things to tell you about Jake. Jake. The name that used to make my heart race now barely registered as anything more than a distant memory. Sure, I texted back. But I'm only in town for 2 days. Can we do Thursday afternoon? I was curious about what Sarah wanted to share, but not in the desperate way I might have been a year ago. My healing had progressed beyond needing updates about Jake's life to validate my choices. The New York presentation went flawlessly. 3 executives from a biotech startup sat around a conference table in Manhattan, nodding appreciatively as I outlined a comprehensive marketing strategy that would position them for their Series B funding round. This is exactly the kind of strategic thinking we need, said their CEO, a woman in her 40s who reminded me of Diana. When can you start? Start. As in, join their company. As in, they were trying to recruit me. I'm flattered, I said, meaning it, but I'm very happy in my current role. We're prepared to offer significant equity and a salary that reflects your obvious capabilities. Obvious capabilities. Words Jake had never used to describe me in 3 years together. Can I think about it? Of course, but don't think too long. Talent like yours doesn't stay available forever. Talent like mine. I flew back to Seattle with those words echoing in my head, not because I planned to take their offer, but because hearing them validated everything I'd discovered about myself since leaving Jake. Thursday afternoon, Sarah and I met at a coffee shop in Fremont, the same neighborhood where Jake and I used to live together. She looked nervous in a way that immediately put me on alert. "How are you doing?" she asked, studying my face like she was looking for signs of heartbreak or regret. "I'm really good, Sarah. Better than I've been in years. You look amazing, like genuinely happy. It's been incredible watching your transformation on Instagram." Transformation. The word Jake had used as an accusation now felt like a compliment. Thank you. I feel like I'm finally living my actual life instead of a smaller version of it. Sarah stirred her latte nervously. That's kind of what I wanted to talk to you about. Jake's been asking about you. A lot. I waited for the familiar flutter of anxiety, the old hope that maybe he'd realized what he'd lost. It didn't come. Okay. He's been in therapy, Sarah continued, as if this should mean something significant to me. Really working on himself, trying to understand why things ended the way they did. That's good for him. He's also been dating someone new. Emma. She's sweet, but... Sarah paused, choosing her words carefully. She reminds me a lot of how you used to be. Kind of anxious, always apologizing, very accommodating. The parallel wasn't lost on me. Jake had found another version of who I used to be, someone whose insecurities made him feel necessary and important. I hope she's happier than I was. Sarah looked surprised by my response. Don't you feel anything about it? About him moving on? I considered the question seriously. Did I feel anything about Jake dating someone new? Relief, maybe. Relief that he'd found someone else to project his need for superiority onto. Relief that his attention was focused somewhere other than the woman I'd become. I feel sad for her, I said honestly. I hope she figures out what I figured out before it takes 3 years. Jake says he realizes now that he was threatened by your success. He says he's learned to be more supportive of strong women. More supportive of strong women. As if strength in women was something he'd learned to tolerate rather than celebrate. Sarah, can I ask you something? Why are you telling me this? She looked uncomfortable. I think he's hoping for some kind of reconciliation. He talks about you constantly, about how different you are now, how he'd handle things differently if he got another chance. Another chance. To do what? To find new ways to undermine my confidence? To develop more sophisticated methods of making me feel grateful for his tolerance? I'm not interested in reconciliation, I said gently. I'm not the same person who would consider going back to someone who needed me to be smaller to feel secure. But he's changed too. He's in therapy, he's working on his issues. Sarah, I'm glad Jake is in therapy. I genuinely hope he becomes the kind of partner his new girlfriend deserves. But that has nothing to do with me anymore. The conversation felt like closing a book I'd already finished reading. Don't you miss what you had together? I thought about Jake's version of love, possessive, conditional, requiring constant performance and gratitude. I thought about the woman I'd been with him, always apologizing, always accommodating, always making myself smaller to fit into the space he'd allotted for me. I miss who I thought he was, I said finally. But that person never existed. Jake loved the version of me that made him feel important. The anxious, insecure version who needed his guidance and protection. He didn't love me. He loved the power dynamic. Sarah looked like she wanted to argue, but something in my expression stopped her. What if you're wrong? What if he really has changed? Then I'm happy for him and whoever he becomes. But I'm not a rehabilitation project, Sarah. I'm not responsible for proving whether Jake has grown or not. That evening, I sat in my apartment looking out at the city lights, thinking about the conversation. 3 years ago, the idea that Jake was in therapy and dating someone new would have devastated me. I would have spiraled into self-doubt, wondering if I'd given up too easily, if I'd been too harsh in my judgment, if his new girlfriend was getting the evolved version of him I'd never been worthy of receiving. Now, I felt nothing but detached curiosity about the choices strangers make. Because that's what Jake had become, a stranger whose opinions no longer influenced my sense of self-worth, whose validation I no longer needed, whose love I no longer wanted. The real victory wasn't that I'd lost weight or gotten promoted or learned to love myself. The real victory was the gradual replacement of his voice in my head with my own. Where he used to whisper that I wasn't smart enough, pretty enough, successful enough, I now heard evidence to the contrary, client testimonials praising my strategic thinking, colleagues seeking my input on complex projects, my reflection in mirrors that showed not the anxious woman Jake had convinced me I was, but someone competent, attractive, and genuinely content. I'd started dating again, not because I needed validation or companionship, but because I was finally curious about what it felt like to be chosen by someone who wanted me to shine. The men I attracted now were different, confident enough in themselves that they didn't need me to be less than I was, successful enough that they celebrated rather than resented my achievements, secure enough that my independence felt like a gift rather than a threat. Like David, the architect I'd been seeing for 3 months. "I love watching you work," he'd said last week, observing me prepare for a client presentation. "You get this intensity in your eyes, like you're solving puzzles that matter to you." Intensity. What Jake had called overwhelming, David found attractive. "It doesn't bother you that I travel so much for work." Why would it bother me? You're building something important. I want to support that, not compete with it. Support, not compete. The difference between love and possession in 6 words. That night, I updated my Instagram with a photo of my city view, the caption reading, "3 years ago, someone told me no one would ever love me like he did. He was right. No one will ever love me with conditions, limitations, and constant reminders of my inadequacy." Thank God for that. The post got more likes and comments than anything I'd ever shared. Women sharing their own stories of leaving relationships that required them to be smaller. Men praising the courage it takes to choose growth over comfort. Friends celebrating the woman I'd become since choosing myself over someone else's version of love. Jake's prediction had come true in the most unexpected way. No one would ever love me like he did, possessively, conditionally, with the constant suggestion that I should be grateful for his tolerance of my obvious defects. Real love, I'd discovered, didn't require me to be smaller, quieter, or less ambitious. Real love celebrated my growth, encouraged my dreams, and found my success as exciting as its own. Real love didn't need me to fail to feel successful, didn't need me to be insecure to feel important. didn't need me to doubt myself to feel valuable. The woman Jake had said no one would ever love had become someone impossible not to love, starting with herself. And that, I realized, sitting in my apartment overlooking a city full of possibilities, was the most revolutionary act of all. Learning to love myself not as a consolation prize for being unlovable to others, but as the foundation for every healthy relationship I'd build from now on. Jake had been right about one thing: no one would ever love me like he did. Thank God for that. Hit subscribe if you're ready for more stories about women who turned their exes' insults into their success playlist, and tell us in the comments, what was your biggest revenge glow-up moment? Let's normalize outgrowing people who needed us broken to feel whole. Diamond.